So one of the things that I maintain through reading different books and different literature is that things don't happen by accident within a piece of writing. Sometimes you write and you come up with ideas on the fly, but more often than not, things are done deliberately. This includes the names of characters. Usually, an author will pick a name for a character that they think reflects what they want that character to demonstrate through the piece. We talked last time in the last chapter about Braxton Underwood's name and how Underwood kind of has a connotation to it, and that there's things underneath the surface beyond what's just shown on top, and that he's got a lot more depth of character than most of the people in the town suspected. But he's not the only person in To Kill a Mockingbird with a name that reflects something about them as a person. So let's take a look at some of the different names that we have throughout To Kill a Mockingbird and what we can learn about them, and more importantly, we can kind of make predictions about who the people are and how things end up based on their names. So, authors don't pick names randomly. Attentive authors look at characters and use names to convey something about them. So let's look at these characters: Scout, Jim, Dill, Atticus, Calpurnia, Boo Radley, or Arthur Radley if you go by his real name, and Tom Robinson. So let's take a look at each of these. Scout. So a scout is a soldier or other person that's sent out ahead of a main force so as to gather information. Now, we know Scout's real name is Jean Louise Finch, but we know that everybody seems to call her Scout with the exception of Aunt Alexandra, who's very formal and doesn't seem to have much use for nicknames. So why do they call her Scout? Why don't they go just by her birth name? Well, what do we know about Scout? She's curious. She looks for new things. She hunts down information. She asks questions, much like a scout in the military would be doing. She loves the outdoors. She seeks that new information, and she's adventurous. These are all sort of the defining characteristics of this person. So we've given her Harper Lee gave her a name, and then gave her a more fitting name as a nickname over the top of that. She's not the only character in the book with a nickname that is outside of their given name. We also have Jim, Jeremy Atticus Finch. Jim is something that is highly prized for their beauty or character, and throughout the book, Jim is kind of held as the ideal young boy who exemplifies all these things that Atticus would want in somebody, and he tries to become the sort of adult that he would want to be. So he's beloved by all the adults. The adults, everyone from Aunt Alexandra to the people on the street, are always holding him up as kind of a shining example. The one exception is Mrs. Dubose, and, well, she kind of does that to everybody. He tries both to learn and to demonstrate his value. He's very excited to share his thoughts and opinions with people and show that he has something to bring to the conversation. He reflects the people around him. So throughout the book, every time that he shows up, people see kind of a mirrored image of themselves, much like you would do in like the facet of a particularly valuable gem. When he's around Atticus, he acts a lot like Atticus. When he's confronted with Mrs. Dubose and her anger and vitriol, he himself turns out angry and, vitriolic. And then finally we have Dill. Dill, we know his real name is Charles Baker Harris, but that everybody calls him Dill. We don't really know why people call him Dill, but much like everybody else, we can extrapolate information about his name and determine who he is as a person. So dill is an annual herb that's used for seasoning food, right? We have dill pickles. You put dill on especially different summer and spring foods. Where do you find dill? You find it in a garden, much like Dill Harris was found in Miss Rachel Haverford's collard patch. It appears in late spring and summer. When does dill show up? He shows up during the summer. And it adds flavor and makes things more interesting. Dill loves telling stories. Dill loves finding new ways to put a spin on something or to see exciting ways to view events. You never have a boring day when Dill Harris is around. Let's look at some of the adults. Atticus. So Atticus refers to somebody from Athens, an Athenian, or somebody from Attica, which was a region in the ancient world, and he is also several philosophers also share the name of Atticus. So when we think of ancient Greece and we have philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, we have Socrates. We also have, as we said, those several different philosophers, and what do they all share in common? They are all very smart, they love to think, and they love to gain information. Although I would argue that Socrates and Atticus Finch probably have very different views on reading. They're smart. We have Socrates, considered the father of modern thought. They are big into writing, with, again, the exception of Socrates, who famously had some very strong opinions on the written word. But Atticus himself loves the idea of writing and of deep intellectualism. We also have Calpurnia. So Calpurnia was the last wife of Julius Caesar. She's patient. She has the gift of foresight. She can often see ahead, Calpurnia, the character, and predict things that are coming based on what is happening in the town and what her knowledge of the world is. Calpurnia, Julius Caesar's wife, famously had a dream where she predicted Caesar's death. So a different kind of foresight. Calpurnia in the book doesn't predict Atticus's death, which is good because it doesn't happen within the scope of To Kill a Mockingbird. But they both are very wise and very, very, very gifted with forethought. She's humble. Both of them were never about themselves, putting themselves center stage. They were always there in service to other people, and very much about what's inside instead of worrying about public perception of you. And she's matronly. Even though Calpurnia was of a different race, even though she was very much aware of the social stigma at the time, she treated the kids like they were her own, which was not uncommon because a lot of the African-American nurses and nannies and cooks at the time were very similar in this regard to the white children that they took care of. And as we see through literature and through different books and things, this was often a big concern, was that you would raise these kids who would then grow up to be racist. And it was a big area of dismay at the time, the idea that your actions are futile because no matter how much you try to raise somebody, society is going to get to them in the end. And this kind of relates again to Calpurnia as Julius Caesar's wife, who saw where Rome was going, who saw who foresaw the death of her husband. And so while she wasn't particularly a mother to Julius Caesar, she was viewed largely as the mother of Rome, as the last wife of Julius Caesar before his assassination. We have Boo Radley / Arthur. He goes by two different names, and each of those names carries different connotations. So Boo, an exclamation intending to frighten, associated with ghosts. Boo, a scary sound. If you're in a haunted house, which he lives in, and you hear this shouted behind you, logically it's going to be kind of a scary situation, which is the very kind of ideal of Boo Radley, is this murderous, scary figure. Rarely seen. There's a reason why we don't go hang out with ghosts. Whether you believe in them or not, we can all agree that they're not particularly commonly seen. They don't just appear in our everyday lives. Very similar with Boo Radley. Every once in a while he comes out, and even then he's not seen very often, such as with the fire. Then we also have Arthur, which is the other name, the name of the legendary English king. He was heroic. What does Boo Radley do in the story? He comes out in order to try to protect Scout from the cold. He offers them gifts and tries to take care of the kids in the way that he is best able to. And we're not going to give away the ending of the book, but there is another heroic deed that's going to be associated with Arthur Radley. He acts as a protector. And finally, there is the whole thing about Excalibur and pulling the sword from the stone and the lady in the lake. And again, something is going to come up with Boo Radley similar to that. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to give away the end of the story. But if you keep this in mind, comparing Arthur Radley to King Arthur, you'll see one more parallel as we get towards the end of the book. You have Tom Robinson. We might look at this, and there might be some connotations between Tom and Uncle Tom's Cabin, the famous book by Harriet Beecher Stowe that Abraham Lincoln famously kind of off the cuff credited with starting the Civil War. I'm not going to go too much into that because that's a whole thing on its own, is the connotations behind that. But instead, let's focus on his last name, Robinson, specifically that first part, Robin. A robin is, by definition, a small bird that's notable for its red breast and songs. Robins are they're songbirds that don't typically cause harm. They just kind of hang around and sing and, eat worms and things. They're harmless. They're a sin to kill, much like a mockingbird, which now that we've read to the part in the book where Tom Robinson was killed, and Mr. Underwood's editorial that it is a sin to kill people that are disabled, be they sitting, standing, or escaping, likened to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children, we can really see the parallels and really kind of get that understanding of what this title means. He helps out. He shows up and he helps out Mayella Ewell. All he really does is do good for people, never ask for something in return. Much like robins, all they do is try to brighten up your day with their song. So we've looked at these names. We've looked at these characters. We understand a little bit more about the depth of the book and the fact that Harper Lee didn't pick these by accident. We know, for instance, that Dill Harris comes from the character of Truman Capote, who was a real person that she spent time with as a kid. But she changed the name because, well, one, she didn't want to include a factual person in here, especially somebody as well known as Truman Capote, because it would really pull focus from the book. But also the fact that she picked the name Dill didn't come from nowhere. To Kill a Mockingbird, we can see now, comes directly from this person. So let's ask ourselves a question, because the whole point of anything that we're doing here is to read, to learn, and to ask ourselves hard questions. So what does your name mean? Your parents didn't often just pick names from the baby book or from wherever just on a whim. Though, interesting note, that is what they did with my brother. But generally, names have some sort of meaning associated with them. So where is your name from? Is it a family name? Was it the name of a famous actor or actress? Was it something that your parents just really liked the sound of? Where did it come from? Why did they pick that name? And what, if any, meaning does your name have? This one you may know already. What does your name mean? Does your name reflect who you are as a person, or did it miss the mark on you? Look at these things. See if you can come up with an answer. Think about them. We'll pick up next time with more To Kill a Mockingbird.